The Georgia sun hung low over the cotton fields, casting long shadows across the plantation that stretched as far as the eye could see. The air was thick with humidity and the weight of another day's labor. In the distance, the master's house stood like a white monument to wealth built on suffering, its columns gleaming in the fading light, while the slave quarters remained hidden in the shadows of ancient oak trees draped with Spanish moss. Nala moved through the rows with practiced efficiency, her fingers bleeding from the sharp cotton bowls, her back screaming from hours bent over the plants. She was 24 years old, though the hardship of her life had etched lines around her eyes that made her appear older. Her dark skin glistened with sweat, and her simple cotton dress, threadbare and patched, clung to her thin frame. But there was something in Nala's eyes that no amount of brutality had managed to extinguish. A fierce intelligence, a quiet rage that simmered just beneath the surface of forced compliance. If you're enjoying the story so far, click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching this video from. We bring you untold stories of resistance, courage, and survival that history has tried to bury. Join our members club for early access to these powerful narratives. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. Beside her in the adjacent row worked her husband, Kofi. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, despite the meager rations, with hands that had once crafted beautiful wooden sculptures in his homeland before slavers had torn him from his village and chained him in the belly of a ship. Now those same hands picked cotton from dawn until darkness fell. Kofi had been on the plantation for 7 years, 3 years longer than Nala, and he had learned to survive by keeping his head down, his voice quiet, his eyes averted. But lately, something had shifted in him. Perhaps it was watching his wife endure daily humiliations, or perhaps it was the accumulation of 1,000 small cruelties finally reaching a breaking point. Master Edmund Thornwood owned this plantation, along with 143 human beings whom the law considered his property. He was a man in his mid-50s, with graying hair and a face that might have been considered distinguished, if not for the cruelty that twisted his features whenever he looked upon those he enslaved. Thornwood had inherited the plantation from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him, and he ran it with the same iron fist and complete disregard for human dignity that had characterized 3 generations of Thornwood rule. But it was not Thornwood himself who managed the day-to-day operations of the plantation. That task fell to his son, Richard Thornwood Jr., a man of 28, who had grown up believing that the people who worked his family's land were somehow less than human, that their pain was irrelevant, that their lives held no value beyond the labor they could provide. Junior, as he was called by everyone on the plantation, was in many ways worse than his father. Where Edmund Thornwood was cruel with calculation, Junior was cruel with enthusiasm. He enjoyed exercising his power, relished the fear in the eyes of those who were forced to serve him. The overseer's bell rang out across the fields, signaling the end of the day's work. Nala straightened slowly, her spine protesting every movement. She hefted her sack of cotton onto her shoulder, feeling the weight of it pull at muscles already exhausted beyond measure. Around her, other enslaved people emerged from the rows like ghosts, their faces drawn with fatigue, their bodies moving with the mechanical precision of people who had learned that survival meant pushing past the limits of endurance. Kofi appeared at her side, his own sack slung over his back. He reached out briefly to touch her arm, a gesture so quick that no one watching would have noticed. But Nala felt the warmth of his hand, the silent communication of love and solidarity that had sustained them both through 3 years of marriage in bondage. They had been married in a ceremony that held no legal weight, conducted by an elderly enslaved preacher in the dead of night, witnessed by their community, but recognized by no court of law. In the eyes of the system that held them captive, they were not husband and wife. They were property that happened to sleep in the same cabin. They joined the line of workers trudging toward the overseer's station, where the day's pickings would be weighed. This was always a moment of tension. Each person was expected to bring in a certain amount. Men, 100 pounds. Women and older children, 80 pounds. Those who fell short would be whipped. Those who exceeded the quota would simply be expected to pick that much again the next day. It was a system designed to extract maximum labor while offering no reward beyond the absence of punishment. Nala's sack was weighed first, 76 pounds. The overseer, a red-faced man named Patterson, who chewed tobacco and spat constantly, shook his head with disgust. 4 pounds short, girl, you know what that means. Fear shot through Nala's body, but she kept her face carefully neutral. She had been whipped before. She knew the feeling of the lash cutting into her back, knew how to dissociate from her body while the pain happened, knew how to clean the wounds afterward with the limited supplies available in the slave quarters, but knowing what was coming did not make it any easier to face. "Please, sir." Kofi's voice came from behind her, quiet but firm. She'd been sick these past few days. The heat got to her. She did her best. Patterson's eyes swiveled to Kofi with interest. It was rare for anyone to speak up, to draw attention to themselves. "That's so. You making excuses for your woman, boy?" The word boy was deliberately chosen, deliberately insulting. Kofi was a grown man, but the language of slavery was designed to diminish, to infantilize, to strip away dignity along with freedom. Kofi's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "No excuses, sir, just stating fact. She'll make up the difference tomorrow. She'll make up the difference and take her punishment for coming up short today," Patterson said. "That's how it works, you know that." Before Kofi could respond, a voice cut through the evening air, sharp and entitled. "What's the delay here, Patterson? Why are these slaves still standing around instead of being dismissed?" Junior Thornwood emerged from the shade of a nearby oak tree, where he had apparently been watching the weighing process. He was dressed in fine clothes despite the heat, a white linen shirt, tan trousers, polished boots. His face was flushed, whether from the temperature or from the whiskey Nala could smell from several feet away. She could not tell. "This one came up short, Mr. Thornwood," Patterson explained, gesturing at Nala. "And her man here is trying to make excuses for her." Junior's eyes fixed on Nala with an intensity that made her skin crawl. It was not the first time she had noticed him watching her. Over the past several months, his attention had become increasingly focused on her, his gaze lingering too long, his comments becoming more personal. She had tried to make herself invisible, to avoid being alone anywhere he might appear, but on a plantation there were limited places to hide. "Is that right?" Junior said, walking closer. "Nala, isn't it? Been on my family's plantation for what? 3 years now?" "Yes, sir," Nala said quietly, keeping her eyes down as was expected. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," Junior commanded. Nala raised her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze with as blank an expression as she could manage. She had learned to hide her thoughts, to show nothing on her face that might provoke further attention or punishment. But Junior seemed to see something there anyway, something that sparked his interest even more. "You're an attractive woman, Nala," he said, his voice taking on a casual tone that somehow made the words even more threatening. "Pity you waste yourself picking cotton all day. There are other ways you could be useful to this household." The implication was clear, and Nala felt Kofi tense beside her. This was not the first time an enslaved woman had been subjected to such suggestions, such demands. The sexual exploitation of enslaved women was common, expected even, treated as another right of ownership by those who held power. Nala had watched other women on the plantation be subjected to this particular horror, had seen how it destroyed something essential in them, even as they were forced to continue living, working, surviving. "My wife is a field worker, sir," Kofi said, his voice strained with the effort of keeping it respectful. "She works hard. She's loyal to the plantation." Junior's head snapped toward Kofi, his expression darkening. "Did I ask for your input, boy? Did I give you permission to speak?" "No, sir, but nothing." Junior took a step closer to Kofi, his hand moving to rest on the riding crop he carried at his belt. "You seem to have forgotten your place. Maybe you need a reminder." The air grew thick with tension. Around them other enslaved people had stopped, their weighing forgotten, watching this confrontation with a mixture of fear and resignation. They had all seen this before. The escalation from words to violence, the way any perceived challenge to authority would be met with brutal punishment, designed not just to harm the individual, but to send a message to everyone watching. "I apologize, Master Thornwood," Kofi said, the words clearly costing him something to speak. "I meant no disrespect." "No disrespect," Junior repeated mockingly. "You interrupt me while I'm speaking to this woman. You make excuses for her laziness, and you claim you meant no disrespect?" He turned to Patterson. 5 lashes for the woman for coming up short, and 10 for the man for his insolence. Nala's heart sank. 10 lashes could be devastating, could leave a person unable to work for days, which would only result in more punishment for failing to meet the next day's quota. It was a cycle designed to break people, and it was remarkably effective. "Please, sir," Nala heard herself saying before she could stop the words. "Punish me double, but spare him. It was my fault for not picking enough. He was just trying to help." Junior's eyes lit up with interest at this plea. He walked over to Nala, standing so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath, could see the pores on his reddened face. "Spare him," he said softly. "You'd take his punishment along with your own." "Yes, sir," Nala whispered, though everything in her rebelled against showing such submission. Junior reached out and gripped Nala's chin, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "What if I have a better idea? What if I spare both of you the whipping, and instead you come up to the house tonight? You serve dinner to my father and me, help in the kitchen, show proper gratitude for my mercy." The offer was a trap, and everyone present knew it. Going to the house alone at night, putting herself in Junior's power away from any witnesses, it could only end one way. But refusing would mean the whipping, would mean Kofi being torn apart right in front of her while she watched helplessly. Before Nala could formulate a response, Kofi stepped forward, placing himself between his wife and Junior Thornwood. It was a small movement, just half a step, but it was enough to break Junior's grip on Nala's chin, enough to assert himself as a barrier between his wife and the man who threatened her. "Touch my wife again," Kofi said, his voice low and dangerous, "and mercy won't save you." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Around them, people gasped. Such open defiance was unthinkable, suicidal. Patterson reached for his whip, but Junior held up a hand to stop him. A slow smile spread across Junior Thornwood's face, but there was no humor in it, only rage barely contained beneath a veneer of amusement. "Is that a threat, boy? Are you threatening me?" Kofi said nothing, but he did not step back, did not lower his eyes, did not show the fear that Nala knew must be coursing through him. He simply stood there, a man protecting his wife, asserting his humanity in a system that denied it. Junior's hand moved faster than Nala could track. The riding crop came up and across, striking Kofi across the face with a crack that echoed across the plantation. Kofi's head snapped to the side, blood springing from a cut above his eye, but he did not fall, did not cry out. "You dare!" Junior hissed, striking again, this time across Kofi's shoulders. "You dare to speak to me that way? To threaten me?" The riding crop fell again and again, each blow landing with vicious precision. Kofi raised his arms to protect his head, but made no other move to defend himself. To fight back would mean death, not just for him, but possibly for Nala as well. So he stood and took the beating, his body jerking with each impact, blood now flowing from multiple cuts on his face and arms. Nala watched in horror, every blow landing on her husband, feeling like it was striking her own body. She wanted to scream, to throw herself between them, to make it stop, but she was frozen, knowing that any intervention would only make things worse. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute, Junior stepped back, breathing hard, his fine shirt splattered with Kofi's blood. He looked at Kofi with disgust, then turned his gaze to Nala. "You wanted to spare him punishment," Junior said coldly. "Well, here's your chance to prove it. Be at the house tonight at 8 o'clock. If you're not there, I'll have him whipped until there's no skin left on his back, and then I'll sell him down to the deep south, to one of those sugar plantations where slaves don't last more than a few years. Your choice." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Nala and Kofi standing in the bloody dust, while Patterson and the other overseers looked on with satisfaction. The message had been sent, the hierarchy reaffirmed. This was the way of things, and any attempt to challenge it would be met with overwhelming force. The walk back to the slave quarters felt endless. Nala supported Kofi as best she could, his weight heavy against her thin frame, as he struggled to stay upright. Blood continued to seep from the cuts on his face and arms, staining the dirt path beneath their feet. Other enslaved people moved past them silently, some casting sympathetic glances, others looking away quickly, not wanting to be associated with someone who had drawn such violent attention from the master's son. Their cabin was one of dozens arranged in rough rows behind the main plantation buildings. It was a simple structure, rough-hewn wood, a dirt floor, no windows, and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. Inside was a single room containing a crude bed frame stuffed with corn husks, a small table, 2 wooden stools, and a few personal possessions they had managed to accumulate over the years. It was not much, but it was theirs, the only space in the world where they could pretend, even for a moment, to have some autonomy over their lives. Nala helped Kofi sit on the edge of the bed, then hurried to fetch water from the communal barrel outside. The evening air had cooled slightly, and she could hear the sounds of the quarters coming to life after the day's work, children playing despite their exhaustion, women preparing the meager evening meals over small fires, men sitting in small groups speaking in low voices about the day's events. By now, word of what had happened at the weighing station would have spread through the entire community. Everyone would know about Kofi's defiance and Junior Thornwood's ultimatum. When Nala returned with the water and a rag torn from an old dress, She began cleaning Kofi's wounds as gently as she could. He winced but said nothing, his jaw set in a hard line. The cut above his eye was deep and would leave a scar. The welts on his arms and shoulders were already beginning to swell and bruise, but it was the look in his eyes that worried Nala most, a mixture of shame and rage that she had never seen so clearly before. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly as she worked. "You shouldn't have stepped between us." "What should I have done?" Kofi's voice was rough, thick with emotion. "Let him put his hands on you. Let him make his vile suggestion while I stood there like a coward? You're not a coward. You're surviving. We're both surviving." Nala dipped the rag in the water, wringing it out carefully. "That's all we can do." "That's not surviving, Nala. That's dying slowly." Kofi caught her hand, stilling her movements. "I watched him touch you, heard him talk about you like you were something he could just take. And I'm supposed to stand there and let it happen, because if I don't, they'll kill me. What kind of man does that make me? What kind of husband?" Tears welled in Nala's eyes, but she blinked them back. She could not afford to cry. Not now. "It makes you the man who's still here with me. Still alive. That's what matters." "Is it?" Kofi released her hand and stood up abruptly, pacing the small confines of the cabin despite his injuries. "Maybe it's not enough anymore. Maybe I'm tired of living on my knees." Fear shot through Nala, sharp and cold. She had heard this kind of talk before from other enslaved people, the talk that came right before someone tried to run, or fought back, or did something else that got them killed or worse. "Don't," she said urgently. "Don't even think about it, Kofi. Whatever you're considering, it's not worth it. And you going to that house tonight, that's worth it. You know what he wants. You know what will happen if you go there." Nala stood and moved to face her husband, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Yes, I know. And if that's the price of keeping you alive, I'll pay it." "No." Kofi's voice was firm, final. "I won't let you. I won't let him do that to you. You don't have a choice. Neither of us has a choice." Nala's voice broke despite her efforts to keep it steady. "This is how it is. This is how it's always been. We endure what we have to endure, and we survive. That's all we can do." "Then maybe survival isn't enough anymore," Kofi said quietly. "Maybe there are worse things than dying." Before Nala could respond, there was a soft knock on the doorframe. They both turned to see old Sarah standing in the doorway. Sarah was the closest thing the slave quarters had to a healer and a spiritual leader. She was in her 70s, though no one knew her exact age, and her body was bent with arthritis and decades of hard labor. But her mind was sharp, and her wisdom was sought by everyone in the community. "Heard what happened at the weighing," Sarah said, her voice raspy with age. "Came to see if you needed help with those wounds." Nala stepped aside to let the older woman enter. Sarah carried a small basket containing various herbs and salves she had managed to cultivate in a tiny garden behind her cabin. She examined Kofi's injuries with practiced efficiency, tisking softly at the deeper cuts. "These'll heal, but that one above your eye needs proper binding or it'll keep bleeding." Sarah pulled out a strip of clean cloth and began wrapping it around Kofi's head. "You were foolish today, boy, brave but foolish." "I couldn't just stand there," Kofi muttered. "I know, I've seen that look in men's eyes before. Seen where it leads, too." Sarah finished the binding and turned her attention to Nala. "And you, child, you thinking of going to that house tonight?" Nala nodded miserably. "He said if I don't, he'll have Kofi whipped and sold south." "He'll do it too," Sarah confirmed. "Junior Thornwood is just like his father, maybe worse. He don't make idle threats." She was quiet for a moment, her weathered hands sorting through her basket. "But going to that house don't guarantee Kofi's safety either. White men like that, they take what they want and then punish you anyway just because they can." "Then what should I do?" Nala asked desperately. "Tell me what to do, Sarah." The old woman looked at her with eyes that had seen too much suffering, too much injustice, too many impossible choices. "Can't tell you what to do, child. Every person got to decide for themselves what they can live with and what they can't. But I can tell you this. Whatever happens tonight, it ain't your fault. It ain't your shame to carry. That belongs to them that made this evil system and them that profit from it." Sarah reached into her basket and pulled out a small pouch. "These are herbs. Mix them in water and drink them after. They'll help prevent a baby if the worst happens. It ain't much, but it's something." Nala took the pouch with shaking hands, the reality of what she was facing settling over her like a suffocating blanket. She had known, of course, what Junior Thornwood wanted, but having it confirmed so boldly, having preparations made for the aftermath, made it impossible to deny or minimize. "There might be another way," Kofi said suddenly. Both women turned to look at him. "We could run. Tonight, before Nala has to go to the house. We could be miles away by morning." Sarah shook her head slowly. And then what? You got papers, you got money, you know which way to go? Which houses along the way might help, and which ones will turn you in? They got dogs, boy. They got men on horses with guns. And when they catch you, and they will catch you, they won't just whip you. They'll make an example out of both of you that the rest of us will never forget. So we just accept it? Kofi's voice was anguished. We just let them do whatever they want to us? I'm saying you got to be smart about it if you want any chance of survival. Running without a plan is just suicide with extra steps. Sarah packed up her basket and moved toward the door, then paused. But if you're serious about running, really serious, then you need to talk to Moses. Nala's breath caught. Moses was a legend in the slave quarters, a name spoken only in whispers. Some said Moses was a person who had escaped slavery years ago and now returned secretly to help others reach freedom. Others said Moses was multiple people, a network of brave souls who risked their lives to guide the enslaved North. Still others claimed Moses was just a story, a myth to give people hope in hopeless circumstances. Moses is real? Nala whispered. Real as you and me, Sarah confirmed. Can't say more than that. And I ain't saying you should run. Just saying if you're going to do it right. Do it with help. She looked at Kofi seriously. But understand this. Even with help, most people who run don't make it. And the ones that do, they leave behind everyone they love, everyone they know. They can never come back. With that, Sarah left, leaving Nala and Kofi alone with an impossible decision. The sun had set completely now, and darkness filled the cabin. Nala lit their single candle, the flame casting dancing shadows on the rough wooden walls. They sat together on the bed, not speaking, each lost in their own thoughts. Nala tried to imagine what freedom might look like, waking up without fear, moving through the world without constantly calculating how to avoid punishment, having children who would grow up owning themselves. The images were so foreign, so impossible to truly comprehend, that they felt like fairy tales rather than potential reality. But the alternative was just as difficult to contemplate. Going to the master's house tonight, submitting to Junior Thornwood's assault, carrying that violation in her body and soul for the rest of her life. And even if she did that, what guarantee did she have that it would protect Kofi? What would stop Junior from demanding she come again tomorrow, and the next night, and the night after that? I won't let you go there, Kofi said finally, breaking the silence. I can't. Even if it means they kill me, I can't watch you walk into that house knowing what will happen, and I can't watch them destroy you, Nala replied. So we're at an impasse. Then we run, Kofi said with sudden conviction. Tonight, both of us. We find Moses, we get help, and we run. You heard what Sarah said. Most people don't make it, but some do. Kofi took both of Nala's hands in his. Some people make it to freedom, Nala. They make it to places where we could live as husband and wife for real, not just pretend. Where we could have children who would never know what it's like to be property. Where I could protect you the way a husband should be able to protect his wife. Nala wanted to believe it was possible. She wanted to believe that somewhere north of this plantation, past the dogs and the patrols and the bounty hunters, there was a place where they could simply exist as human beings with rights and dignity. But years of captivity had taught her to be suspicious of hope, to understand that sometimes hope was just another form of cruelty. If we run and they catch us, she said slowly, they'll make it bad, not just for us, but for everyone here. They'll tighten restrictions, increase punishments, make an example that everyone in the quarters will have to witness. I know, Kofi said, but if we don't run, if you go to that house, something in us will die anyway. Maybe not our bodies, but our souls. And what's the point of surviving if we lose ourselves in the process? It was a question Nala had asked herself countless times over the 3 years since she had been brought to this plantation. She had been born free in a small village, the daughter of farmers who had never known bondage. Then the raiders came, white men and their local collaborators, burning homes and capturing anyone they could find. Nala had been 15 years old when she was taken, old enough to remember clearly what freedom felt like, young enough that the years of slavery that followed had shaped her emerging adulthood. She remembered her mother screaming as they were separated at the market, remembered the sound of her father's voice calling her name as she was loaded onto the ship, remembered making a promise to herself in the darkness of that ship's hold that she would survive, that she would endure, that someday she would be free again. 9 years had passed since that day. 9 years of surviving, of enduring, of waiting for a freedom that never came. And now, faced with the choice between submission and resistance, between safety and dignity, Nala found that promise she had made to her 15-year-old self, rising up inside her with renewed force. Okay, she said quietly, We'll run." Kofi's eyes widened with surprise and something like relief. "You mean it?" "I mean it, but we do it smart. We talk to Moses, we make a plan, and we don't just run blindly into the night." "We don't have much time," Kofi pointed out. "You're supposed to be at the house at 8 o'clock. It's past 7 already." Nala stood up, her mind racing through the logistics. "Then we need to move fast. Who do we talk to about Moses?" "Old Samuel," Kofi said immediately. "He's been here longer than anyone. Came from Maryland originally. If anyone knows how to reach Moses, it's him." Samuel lived 3 cabins down, and they found him sitting outside on a stool, smoking a pipe carved from corncob. He was ancient, his hair white as cotton, his face deeply lined. He had survived slavery for over 60 years, had outlived 2 masters and countless overseers, had watched children and grandchildren sold away from him. If anyone understood the cost of survival in this system, it was Samuel. "Evening," he said calmly as they approached, as if he had been expecting them. "Heard you 2 might be coming by." "We need to speak with you," Kofi said, looking around to make sure they were not being overheard. "About a friend who might be able to help us with a journey." Samuel's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened with understanding. "A journey like that requires careful planning. Ain't something you just decide to do on a whim." "We understand," Nala said, "but circumstances are forcing our hand. We need to make that journey tonight, or not at all." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, puffing on his pipe. Finally he said, "You know the old well, the one that dried up last summer? The one they don't use no more?" "Yes," Kofi said. "Be there at midnight. Can't promise nothing, but maybe someone will be there who can help. Maybe not. Either way, don't speak of this conversation to nobody. Don't pack nothing obvious. Don't say goodbye to nobody. Just be there at midnight if you're serious." "We're serious," Nala said firmly. Samuel nodded slowly. "Then may the Lord watch over you, children. You got a hard road ahead whether you stay or go." They returned to their cabin to wait for midnight, every minute feeling like an hour. Nala used the time to gather a few small items: a spare dress, the pouch of herbs Sarah had given her, a small knife Kofi used for carving, a tin cup, and a piece of fabric that had belonged to her mother. Everything had to fit in a small bundle that would not be obvious to carry. As 8 o'clock approached, Nala felt her anxiety mounting. Junior Thornwood would be expecting her at the house. When she did not appear, he would send someone to fetch her. They needed to make sure they were not in the cabin when that happened. "We should go now," Kofi said, reading her thoughts. "Hide somewhere until midnight. Make sure they don't find us when they come looking." They slipped out of the cabin just before 8, moving quietly through the shadows of the quarters. Most people were inside their own cabins now, trying to get what rest they could before another brutal day of work began at dawn. Nala and Kofi made their way to the edge of the quarters, to a small copse of trees where they could hide and watch. Sure enough, about 20 minutes later, they saw Patterson making his way through the quarters, torch in hand, heading straight for their cabin. He pounded on the door, shouting Nayla's name. When there was no answer, he pushed the door open and went inside, emerging a moment later looking angry and frustrated. Nala and Kofi pressed themselves against the ground, barely breathing as Patterson began searching the nearby cabins, asking if anyone had seen them. The fear was palpable, as enslaved people shook their heads, knowing that to be caught helping runaways meant punishment almost as severe as running yourself. After about an hour, Patterson gave up his search and headed back toward the main house, presumably to report to Junior Thornwood that Nala had not appeared for her commanded presence and could not be located. Nala knew this would enrage Junior, would likely result in collective punishment for the entire quarters. Guilt twisted in her stomach, but she pushed it down. She could not let guilt trap her in this place. The hours crawled by as they waited for midnight. Nala found herself thinking about all the people she would be leaving behind. Sarah, who had shown her kindness and shared her knowledge. Samuel, who was risking his own safety to help them. The children who played in the quarters despite their circumstances. The women who had become like sisters through shared suffering. She thought about her mother, sold away years ago, whom she would probably never see again. She thought about the future children she might have if they made it to freedom, children who would never know the weight of chains. Finally, the old church bell in town struck midnight, the sound carrying across the plantation on the night air. Nala and Kofi rose from their hiding place and made their way carefully toward the old well, moving from shadow to shadow, listening for any sound of patrols or dogs. The well was located near the far edge of the plantation, close to the woods that marked the boundary of Thornwood property. It stood silent and abandoned in the moonlight, its wooden cover rotting and half collapsed. For a moment, Nala feared they had been sent on a false errand, that no one would be there to help them. Then a figure emerged from the trees, a woman, tall and powerfully built, wearing dark clothes that helped her blend into the night. Her face was partially covered by a scarf, but her eyes were visible, sharp and assessing. "You the ones looking to catch the train?" the woman asked, her voice low and controlled. It took Nala a moment to understand the coded language, the underground railroad, the network of safe houses and brave conductors who helped enslaved people escape to freedom. This woman must be one of those conductors, maybe even the legendary Moses herself. "Yes," Kofi answered. "We need to go tonight." The woman looked them over carefully, her gaze lingering on the bandage around Kofi's head, the fear in Nala's eyes. "Running ain't easy. The road ahead is hard and dangerous. You'll travel at night through swamps and forests. You'll have to hide during the day. You'll go hungry and cold and scared. If you're caught, you'll wish you were dead before they're done making an example of you. You sure you're ready for that?" "We're sure," Nala said, and she realized as she spoke that it was true. Whatever lay ahead could not be worse than what lay behind them. The woman studied them for another long moment, then nodded sharply. "My name is Harriet, but most folks call me Moses. I've made this journey 19 times, brought over 300 souls to freedom, and I ain't never lost a passenger yet. But that's because my passengers follow my rules exactly. You understand?" "We understand," Kofi and Nala said in unison. "First rule, you do what I say when I say it without question. If I say hide, you hide. If I say run, you run. If I say be silent, you don't even breathe loud. Second rule, we travel in the dark, rest in the day. Third rule, if anyone gets caught, the others keep moving. We don't all die trying to save one. Fourth rule, if you get scared and want to turn back, you do it now. Once we start, there's no going back. You turn around, you'll lead the patrols right to us and endanger every safe house on the route." The rules were harsh but necessary. Nala understood that Harriet's success came from her unwavering discipline, her refusal to let sentiment override survival. "We won't turn back," Nala promised. "Good. Then let's move. They'll have the dogs out searching for you by dawn, and we need to be far away by then." Harriet turned and began walking toward the woods, moving with practiced silence. Nala and Kofi followed, their hearts pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The forest was dark and dense, the moonlight barely penetrating the canopy overhead. Harriet moved through it with confidence, following paths invisible to Nala's eyes. They walked for what felt like hours, pushing through underbrush, crossing streams, climbing over fallen logs. Every sound made Nala's heart leap. Was that a dog barking in the distance? Were those voices calling out, organizing a search? But Harriet seemed unconcerned, maintaining a steady pace that was neither too fast nor too slow. "We're heading for a safe house about 15 miles north," she explained in a whisper. "It's a Quaker family, good people who've been helping runaways for years. We'll rest there during the day, then continue tomorrow night." 15 miles, Kofi repeated. He was already limping slightly, his injuries from earlier making the journey more difficult. "How long will it take to reach freedom?" "We're in Georgia now," Harriet said. "Freedom is in Pennsylvania, maybe 1,000 miles north. If everything goes perfect, no close calls, no delays, no injuries, we can make it in 6 to 8 weeks. But things rarely go perfect. Most journeys take longer. 6 to 8 weeks of traveling at night, hiding during the day, constantly looking over their shoulders. It seemed impossible, overwhelming. But Nala forced herself to focus on the immediate goal, making it through this first night, reaching that first safe house. She could not think about the full enormity of the journey, or she would collapse under the weight of it. They walked until Nala's legs felt like they might give out, until her feet were bloody from the rough terrain, until she could think of nothing but the next step and the one after that. Kofi was struggling even more, his face tight with pain, as his injuries made every movement agony. But he did not complain, did not ask to slow down or rest. He just kept moving, one foot in front of the other, driven by the same desperate hope that propelled Nala forward. As the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, Harriet finally called a halt. They were standing at the edge of a clearing, and Nala could see a farmhouse in the distance, small and simple, with smoke rising from the chimney. "That's where we're heading," Harriet said, "but we have to be careful. Even though these people are friends, we can't just walk up to the door in broad daylight. Too risky if anyone's watching. See that barn?" She pointed to a structure behind the house. "There's a hidden room under the floorboards. That's where you'll spend the day. I'll go announce our arrival, make sure it's safe, then come back for you." Harriet disappeared into the pre-dawn gloom, moving silently toward the farmhouse. Nala and Kofi crouched in the underbrush, waiting anxiously. Nala could feel exhaustion pulling at her, could see it in the way Kofi's shoulders slumped. They had been awake for nearly 24 hours, and the adrenaline that had sustained them through the night was beginning to wear off. Minutes stretched out endlessly. What if this was a trap? What if someone had followed them? What if the family had been discovered and arrested for helping runaways? Nala's mind spun through countless scenarios, each more frightening than the last. Then Harriet emerged from the barn and waved them forward. They ran across the clearing, feeling horribly exposed in the growing light, and ducked into the barn. Harriet led them to a corner where hay was piled against the wall. She pushed it aside, revealing a trapdoor underneath. "Down you go," she said, pulling the door open to reveal a ladder descending into darkness. Nala climbed down first, her feet finding the rungs in the dim light. The space below was cramped, maybe 6 feet square and 4 feet high, with just enough room for 3 people to lie down if they squeezed together. There were blankets piled in one corner, a bucket with a lid in another, and a small basket that Nala hoped contained food. Kofi descended after her, wincing as the movement jarred his injuries. Harriet came last, pulling the trapdoor shut above them and plunging them into complete darkness. "There's a small air vent," Harriet's voice came from the blackness. "Enough to breathe, but not enough for much light. This is where you'll stay until nightfall. There's bread and dried meat in the basket, water in the jug. Use the bucket for necessities. Don't make any noise, no matter what you hear above. The family will go about their normal day, feeding animals, doing chores. Sometimes they have visitors. You stay silent through all of it. This is the moment that changes everything. If you're moved by Nala and Kofi's courage, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. We're committed to bringing you powerful stories of resistance and resilience that mainstream history often overlooks. Join our membership club for exclusive content and early access to new episodes. Your engagement helps these important stories reach more people. Now let us see what happens next in their dangerous journey to freedom. Nala's body was screaming for rest, but her mind was racing too fast for sleep. They had done it. They had actually run, had made it through the first night, had traveled 15 miles away from the plantation, but the reality of what they had left behind was beginning to sink in. "They'll punish everyone in the quarters," she whispered to Kofi in the darkness. "When they realize we're gone, Junior Thornwood will take it out on everyone." "I know," Kofi replied, his voice heavy with guilt. "But if we had stayed, if you had gone to that house, that would have destroyed us both, and tomorrow it would have been someone else's wife or daughter. The system doesn't stop unless people resist it." He was right. Nala knew. The violence and exploitation they had fled was not personal. It was structural, built into every aspect of the plantation system. Their running might bring punishment to those left behind, but staying would only have perpetuated their own suffering without changing anything. Still, the guilt gnawed at her. She thought of Sarah, who had given her the herbs and the hope that escape was possible. She thought of Samuel, who had directed them to this rescue. She thought of all the children in the quarters who would witness whatever collective punishment Junior Thornwood devised as a warning against future runaways. "You think we'll make it?" she asked quietly. "All the way to Pennsylvania?" "I don't know," Kofi admitted, "but I'd rather die trying to be free than live another day as someone's property." They lay in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the barn above them. Animals moving, hay being shifted, the distant voices of the Quaker family beginning their day. Exhaustion finally overtook fear, and Nala felt herself drifting into an uneasy sleep, her hand clasped tightly in Kofi's. She was awakened some hours later by voices directly above them. Her eyes snapped open in the darkness, her heart hammering with sudden terror. Kofi's hand squeezed hers in warning. "Stay silent, stay still." "Heard they had 2 slaves run off from the Thornwood plantation last night," a male voice was saying. "Got the whole county on alert, dogs tracking through the swamps." "Is that so?" A second voice, calmer, with the distinctive gentle cadence of the Quaker family. "Well, I hope the poor souls make it to freedom. No human being should be held in bondage." "You be careful talking like that, friend," the first voice warned. "Thornwood's offering a big reward for their return. $500 for both of them, dead or alive, and he's got men watching all the roads north, checking anyone who might be helping runaways." $500. It was more money than most people in the county would see in a year. Nala felt sick, knowing that such a reward would motivate countless people to search for them, to betray them if given the chance. "I appreciate the warning," the Quaker man said, "but I keep to my own business and trust the Lord to watch over those in need." The conversation moved on to other topics. weather, crops, local news. But Nala could barely hear it over the blood rushing in her ears. $500, dead or alive. Junior Thornwood was not just angry about losing property. This was personal now, a matter of pride and power. He would not rest until they were caught or killed. After what felt like an eternity, the visitor left and the barn fell quiet again. Nala could hear Kofi's ragged breathing beside her, knew he was thinking the same thing she was. Had they made a terrible mistake? Were they going to die out here, hunted like animals, for a freedom they might never reach? "We keep going." Harriet's voice came from the darkness as if she had read their thoughts. "That reward money means things just got more dangerous, but it don't change the plan. We keep moving north. We keep to the shadows, and we trust in the network that's gotten hundreds of people to freedom before you." "What if someone in the network betrays us for that money?" Kofi asked. "Then they weren't really part of the network to begin with," Harriet said firmly. "The people who risk their lives to help runaways don't do it for money. They do it because they believe in justice, in human dignity, in the basic right of every person to own themselves. Money can't buy that kind of conviction." Nala wanted to believe her, wanted to have that kind of faith in human goodness, but she had seen too much cruelty, too much casual violence, too many people willing to inflict suffering for their own benefit. Still, what choice did they have but to trust? They had committed themselves to this path, and there was no going back now. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. The hidden room was stuffy and uncomfortable, and the darkness played tricks on Nala's mind. She found herself imagining sounds that were not there. Dogs barking, men shouting, footsteps approaching the barn. Every creak of wood, every flutter of birds in the loft above sent her heart racing. They ate the bread and dried meat sparingly, not knowing when they would have access to more food. The water in the jug was warm and tasted metallic, but Nala drank it gratefully, her throat parched from the previous night's exertion. As the day wore on, Kofi's injuries began to trouble him more. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding, but it was swollen and hot to the touch. The welts on his back and shoulders were stiffening, making it painful for him to move. Harriet examined him by feel in the darkness, her experienced hands assessing the damage. "You'll survive," she pronounced. "Seen worse, but you need to keep moving tonight, keep the blood flowing, or you'll stiffen up completely." "I can make it," Kofi insisted, though Nala could hear the pain in his voice. Finally, after what felt like days but was probably only 12 hours, they heard 3 sharp knocks on the floor above them, the signal that it was safe to emerge. Harriet pushed open the trapdoor, and blessed cool night air flowed into their hiding place. They climbed out stiffly, their bodies protesting after the long confinement. The Quaker family was waiting in the barn, a man and woman in their 40s dressed in simple grey clothing, their faces kind but serious. The woman had prepared food for them: cornbread, ham, boiled eggs and milk. More food than Nala had seen at one time in years. "Eat quickly, but not too much," the woman advised. "You have another hard night of walking ahead, and a full stomach will slow you down." As they ate, the man spread a map on a barrel showing Harriet the route ahead. "There's been increased patrol activity along the main roads," he explained. "You'll need to take the long way around, through the Okefenokee swamp. It's harder going, but less likely to encounter bounty hunters." The Okefenokee swamp. Nala had heard stories about that place, a vast wilderness of water and trees, filled with alligators and snakes, where people could disappear without a trace. It seemed impossibly dangerous, but if the alternative was running into patrols, she supposed they had no choice. "We'll manage," Harriet said confidently. "We always do." The Quaker woman handed Nala a bundle: "Extra clothes in case yours get ruined in the swamp, and some herbs for your husband's injuries. Change the bandages when you can. Keep the wounds clean." "Thank you," Nala said, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers who risked so much to help people they did not know. "Why do you do this? Help us, I mean. You could be arrested, lose everything." The woman smiled gently. "Because we are all children of God, and no person has the right to own another. We do what we do because it's right, and because we believe that someday this evil institution will crumble. Every person we help reach freedom is another crack in its foundation." They left the farm as darkness fully settled over the land, moving once again into the forest. But this time the terrain was different, wetter, more treacherous. They were entering the swamp, and with each step the ground became softer, the air more humid, the sounds more alien and frightening. Water snakes slithered through the shallows. Alligator eyes glinted red in the moonlight. Strange birds called from the cypress trees, their cries echoing across the dark water. Nala had never been more terrified in her life, but she forced herself to keep moving, to trust in Harriet's expertise, to believe that somewhere beyond this nightmare landscape lay the promise of freedom. They waded through water that sometimes reached their waists, the bottom soft and sucking at their feet. Kofi struggled with the uneven terrain, his injured body protesting every movement. Several times he stumbled and nearly fell, only Nala's steadying hand keeping him upright. "How long do we have to stay in this swamp?" Nala asked Harriet during a brief rest. 3, maybe 4 nights, Harriet replied. "It's slower going, but it's our best chance. The dogs can't track through water, and most bounty hunters won't venture this deep into the swamp. Too dangerous for them. 3 or 4 more nights of this." Nala did not know if she could endure it, did not know if Kofi's battered body could take the punishment, but they had no choice. They could only keep moving forward one step at a time toward a freedom that still seemed impossibly far away. As they pushed deeper into the swamp, Nala found herself thinking about Junior Thornwood's rage when he discovered they had escaped. She imagined him organizing search parties, offering that massive reward, vowing to make an example of them when they were caught. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt something unexpected. Satisfaction. They had defied him. They had refused to accept the role he had assigned them. They had chosen resistance over submission, dignity over safety. Whatever happened now, whatever the cost, they had already won a victory by simply refusing to remain property. The night wore on, and with each hour that passed without discovery, Nala felt a small kernel of hope beginning to grow in her chest. Maybe they really could make it. Maybe freedom was not just a dream, but an actual destination they could reach if they were brave enough, strong enough, determined enough to keep moving forward no matter what obstacles lay in their path. The swamp seemed endless, a watery maze where every cypress tree looked identical to the last, where the boundary between solid ground and deep water was impossible to distinguish in the darkness. By the 3rd night, Nala had lost all sense of direction, could no longer tell if they were making progress or simply traveling in circles through this primordial wilderness. Kofi's condition was deteriorating. The infection in the cut above his eye had worsened, despite Harriet's attempts to clean and re-bandage it. He was running a fever, his skin hot and clammy to the touch, his movements becoming increasingly uncoordinated. But he refused to stop, refused to admit weakness, driven by sheer force of will to keep placing one foot in front of the other. "We need to rest," Nala insisted during their 4th night in the swamp. "He needs proper medicine, a real bed, time to heal." "Can't stop now," Harriet said, though her eyes showed concern as she looked at Kofi. "We're close to the next safe house, just a few more miles. He can rest there, get proper care. But if we stop here in the swamp, we're sitting ducks for anyone tracking us." So they pushed on, with Nala practically carrying Kofi through the last miles, his weight heavy against her exhausted body. She did not know where she found the strength. Perhaps it was love. Perhaps it was stubborn determination. Perhaps it was simply that stopping would mean death and her body refused to accept that outcome. Finally, as dawn approached, they emerged from the swamp onto solid ground. Before them stood a small cabin, isolated and surrounded by dense forest. Smoke rose from its chimney, and as they approached, the door opened to reveal an elderly black man, himself a former slave, who had escaped years ago and now dedicated his life to helping others find freedom. "Lord have mercy," the man said when he saw Kofi's condition. "Get him inside, quickly now." They half-carried, half-dragged Kofi into the cabin, laying him on a bed in the corner. The old man, who introduced himself as Isaiah, immediately began examining Kofi's wounds with practiced hands. He tisked disapprovingly at the infected cut, then began gathering herbs and clean water. "This needs to be drained and cleaned properly," Isaiah explained. "It's going to hurt him, but if we don't do it, the infection will spread, could kill him." Nala held Kofi's hand as Isaiah worked. Feeling him grip her fingers so tightly, she thought the bones might break. Kofi groaned and thrashed as Isaiah cleaned out the infection, but he did not cry out, did not beg for it to stop. When it was finally over, his face was grey with pain and exhaustion, but the wound looked better, cleaner. "He needs rest," Isaiah pronounced. "At least 3 days, maybe more. Can't travel in this condition." "We don't have 3 days," Harriet said worriedly. "The longer we stay in one place, the more dangerous it becomes. And Thornwood's men are still searching. They won't give up. Then they'll have to search without finding us," Isaiah said firmly. "Because this man travels in his current state, he'll die on the road. Simple as that." They stayed at Isaiah's cabin for 5 days, each one feeling like an eternity to Nala. Every sound outside made her jump. Was that horses approaching? Were those dogs barking in the distance? But Isaiah's cabin was well hidden, accessible only by paths known to very few, and no search party appeared at their door. During those days of forced rest, Nala had time to think about everything they had left behind. She thought about the women in the quarters who had been her friends, wondered if they were being punished for her and Kofi's escape. She thought about the children, hoped that somehow their running might inspire others to believe that freedom was possible. She thought about her mother, sold away to a plantation somewhere in Alabama, and realized that in choosing freedom, she was choosing to never see her mother again, even if by some miracle they were both still alive when slavery finally ended. The weight of these thoughts threatened to crush her, but she forced herself to focus on the present, on Kofi's gradual recovery, on the next stage of their journey. Dwelling on what was lost would not help them reach what might be gained. Kofi's fever broke on the third day, and by the fifth his strength had returned enough that Isaiah pronounced him fit to travel. They prepared to leave that night, grateful for Isaiah's care, but anxious to keep moving north. "You're about halfway now," Isaiah told them as they prepared to depart. "Georgia behind you, South Carolina ahead, then North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, and finally Pennsylvania. The journey gets easier in some ways as you go north. More safe houses, more people willing to help, but it gets more dangerous too, because that's where the professional slave catchers operate. Men who make their living hunting runaways, who know all the tricks, all the routes. You'll need to be smarter than ever." They left Isaiah's cabin under cover of darkness, following Harriet once more into the unknown. The terrain had changed again. No more swamps, but rolling hills covered in pine forests, open fields that had to be crossed quickly under cover of darkness, small towns that had to be skirted carefully. One night, about 2 weeks after leaving Isaiah's cabin, they were crossing through the edge of a small South Carolina town when disaster nearly struck. They were moving through an alley between two buildings when suddenly a door opened and a man stepped out, almost colliding with Harriet. For a frozen moment they all stood perfectly still, staring at each other. The man was white, middle-aged, dressed in rough work clothes. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of 3 black people creeping through the alley in the middle of the night. Nala's heart stopped. This was it. They were caught. It was over. The man would raise an alarm, and within minutes they would be surrounded, captured, returned to Georgia and the brutal punishment that awaited them. But instead of shouting, the man held up his hands in a calming gesture. "Easy now," he said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you. Are you runaways?" Harriet's hand moved to the knife at her belt, but she did not draw it yet. "What's it to you?" "I'm an abolitionist," the man said quickly. "I don't believe in slavery. If you're running north, I can help. My house is just down the street. You can hide in my cellar until it's safe to move on. It could be a trap." They had heard stories of people pretending to be abolitionists, luring runaways into false safety, only to turn them in for reward money. But they also had few options. Standing in this alley debating was dangerous in itself. Harriet made a decision. "Show us." The man led them quickly to a modest house at the edge of town. He unlocked the door and ushered them inside, then showed them a hidden entrance to a cellar beneath the kitchen floor. The space was better equipped than most of the hiding places they had used. Blankets, food supplies, even books to pass the time. "My name is Thomas," the man explained. "I've been helping runaways for 5 years now. You're safe here, but you'll need to stay quiet during the day. My neighbors don't know what I do, and it needs to stay that way." They stayed in Thomas's cellar for 2 days, resting and regaining their strength. Thomas brought them news from the outside world. The search for them was still active, but it had shifted further south, the assumption being that they had either been caught by now or had died in the swamp. The reward was still posted, but attention was beginning to fade. On the second night, Thomas brought them something unexpected. Newspapers from up north, from Philadelphia and Boston. Papers that spoke openly about the evils of slavery, that printed stories of successful escapes, that argued passionately for abolition. Nala read these papers with wonder. Her literacy, taught to her secretly by a sympathetic enslaved house servant years ago, allowing her to understand the words that spoke of a world she had barely dared to imagine. There were white people, lots of them apparently, who believed slavery was wrong, who were actively working to end it, who saw enslaved people as human beings, deserving of freedom and dignity. "How many people think this way?" she asked Thomas. "How many people in the North oppose slavery?" "More every day," Thomas replied. "The abolitionist movement is growing. There are churches dedicated to it, newspapers, political parties. It's not everyone. Plenty of Northerners don't care. And some actively support slavery for economic reasons. But the tide is turning. Slowly. Too slowly for those who suffer under slavery now, but it's turning." This knowledge sustained Nala as they continued their journey. They were not alone in their desire for freedom. They were not fighting against an immovable system that would last forever. Change was possible. was happening, was being fought for by people they would never meet. The weeks blurred together as they made their way through North Carolina and into Virginia. They hid in barns and cellars, traveled through forests and along riverbanks, went days without proper food and nights without proper sleep. Twice they had close calls with slave catchers. Once they had to hide in a river for hours, breathing through hollow reeds while men and dogs searched the banks mere feet away. Another time they were nearly discovered in a safe house when authorities showed up to search it, saved only by a hidden compartment that the searchers did not find. Through it all, Nala and Kofi clung to each other and to the hope that kept them moving forward. They had been traveling for nearly 6 weeks now, had covered hundreds of miles, had endured hardships that would have broken many people, but they were still alive, still free, still moving toward Pennsylvania and the promise of legal freedom. One night in late autumn, they crossed into Maryland, the last slave state they would have to traverse before reaching Pennsylvania. The air had turned cold, and they had only thin clothes to protect them from the chill. Harriet had warned them that Maryland was particularly dangerous. It bordered Pennsylvania, so it was heavily patrolled by slave catchers who knew that runaways this far north were close to their goal and might take risks. They were moving through a forest when they heard it, the baying of hounds in the distance getting closer. Someone had picked up their trail. "Run!" Harriet commanded, and they ran, crashing through the underbrush, abandoning stealth for speed. The dogs were getting closer, their cries echoing through the night, and behind them Nala could hear men's voices shouting to each other. They burst out of the forest into a clearing and found themselves facing a wide river, its dark water moving swiftly in the moonlight. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were getting louder. They had maybe minutes before the dogs and their handlers caught up. "Can you swim?" Harriet asked urgently. "Yes," Nala said, though she had not swum in years and never in water this cold and fast. "Then we cross here. It's our only chance." Harriet plunged into the water without hesitation, and Nala and Kofi followed. The cold was shocking, stealing the breath from Nala's lungs. The current was stronger than it looked, pulling at her clothes, dragging her downstream even as she tried to swim across. Beside her, Kofi was struggling, his still healing injuries making his movements weak and uncoordinated. Nala grabbed his arm, pulling him along with her, fighting against the current with every ounce of strength she had left. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed in protest, but she refused to let go, refused to let the river separate them after they had come so far together. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, they reached the far bank. They dragged themselves onto the shore, coughing and gasping, their bodies shaking with cold and exhaustion. Harriet was already there, pulling them up, urging them to keep moving. "The dogs can't track across the river," she explained through chattering teeth, "but the men might find a bridge or a boat. We need to get far from here, find shelter before we freeze." They stumbled through the darkness, their wet clothes clinging to them, the cold seeping into their bones. Just when Nala thought she could not take another step, could not endure another moment of this torture, she saw lights ahead, a small farmhouse, smoke rising from its chimney. Harriet approached cautiously and knocked on the door using a specific pattern. 3 quick knocks, 2 slow, then 1 quick. A code, Nala realized, identifying them as runaways in need of help. The door opened to reveal a young Quaker couple, their faces showing alarm at the sight of 3 half-frozen people dripping water on their porch. But they did not hesitate, pulling them inside immediately, wrapping them in blankets, building up the fire, bringing hot soup and dry clothes. "You're almost there," the Quaker woman said gently as they warmed themselves by the fire. "Pennsylvania is just 20 miles north. 1 more night of travel, and you'll be in free territory. 1 more night." After nearly 2 months of running, hiding, struggling, suffering, they were just 1 more night away from freedom. Nala looked at Kofi, saw her own wonder and disbelief reflected in his eyes. They had actually done it. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, they had made it to the threshold of freedom. But Nala knew that crossing into Pennsylvania did not mean their struggles were over. There were still slave catchers who operated in free states, still the danger of being caught and returned south under the fugitive slave law. True safety would only come when they reached Canada, or when slavery itself was finally abolished. Still, Pennsylvania represented something crucial, the moment when they stopped being property under the law and became people with rights, even if those rights were limited and constantly threatened. It was the difference between being something and being someone. They rested that day in the Quaker couple's home, eating the best meal Nala had tasted in years, sleeping in real beds with clean sheets, feeling almost human again for the first time since they had left the plantation. The couple told them about the community of free black people in Philadelphia, about the jobs available, the schools where even black children could learn to read and write, the churches and mutual aid societies that helped newcomers establish themselves. It sounded like paradise to Nala, though she knew the reality would be more complex. Freedom brought its own challenges, the need to find work and housing, to navigate a world without the brutal structure of slavery, but with its own forms of discrimination and hardship. But these were challenges she was eager to face, problems she wanted to have because they were the problems of free people, not the problems of property. As night fell, and they prepared for their final journey into Pennsylvania, Nala felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was joy and anticipation, certainly, but also grief for what they had left behind, fear for what lay ahead, and a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond the physical. They had survived, but survival had cost them so much. They had gained their freedom, but they had lost their community, their home, any connection to their past. They would build a new life in the North, but it would be a life forever marked by the trauma of what they had endured to reach it. "Are you ready?" Harriet asked as they prepared to leave. Nala looked at Kofi, at the scars on his face that would mark him forever, as someone who had resisted, had fought back, had chosen dignity over safety. She thought about the woman she had been on that Georgia plantation, terrified, trapped, seeing no way out, and she thought about the woman she was now, someone who had walked through swamps and rivers, who had hidden in darkness and run from dogs, who had chosen freedom, even when it meant risking everything. "Yes," Nala said, "we're ready." The final night of their journey felt different from all the others. There was a lightness in the air despite the autumn chill, a sense of anticipation that made even the darkness seem less oppressive. They walked through farmland now, past fields harvested bare for the winter, past barns and houses where free people slept without fear of being torn from their beds and sold away from their families. Harriet led them along a road that followed the state line, pointing out landmarks as they went. "See that creek ahead? That's the boundary. Once we cross it, you're in Pennsylvania. You're free." Free. The word still felt strange to Nala, abstract and impossible even as they approached its physical manifestation. She had lived for so long with the weight of bondage that she could not quite imagine what it would feel like to shed it, could not comprehend what freedom would actually mean in daily life. They reached the creek just before dawn. It was a small stream, easily crossed by a simple wooden bridge. Such an ordinary thing, just a bridge over a creek, but it represented the boundary between slavery and freedom, between being property and being a person under the law. Harriet stopped at the edge of the bridge. "This is where I leave you," she said. "I've got to head back south, bring more people north, but you two, you're going to make it. You're strong, you're smart, and you've got each other. That's more than most folks have when they start their free lives." "How can we ever thank you?" Nala asked, overwhelmed with gratitude for this woman who had risked her life to guide them to freedom. "You thank me by living well," Harriet replied, "by building a good life, by helping others when you can, by never forgetting where you came from or the people still trapped in bondage. And someday, when slavery finally ends, and it will end, I promise you that, you make sure the world remembers what it cost to fight for freedom." She embraced them both quickly, then turned and disappeared back into the darkness, heading south once again to rescue others who desperately needed her help. Nala watched her go, understanding that Harriet's courage was on a scale she could barely comprehend, choosing again and again to return to the place of greatest danger, to risk capture and death, all to bring others to freedom. "Ready?" Kofi asked, offering Nala his hand. She took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. Together they stepped onto the bridge, one step, then another, their footsteps echoing on the wooden planks. With each step, Nala felt something inside her shifting, changing, as if her very molecules were being rearranged. They reached the middle of the bridge, the exact point where Georgia law no longer had power over their bodies, where they stopped being fugitive slaves and became free black people. Nala stopped there, unable to move for a moment, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they had achieved. "We did it," Kofi whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "We actually did it, Nala, we're free." And then Nala was crying, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body, releasing months of fear and tension and desperation. Kofi held her as she wept, his own tears falling silently. They stood there on that bridge as the sun began to rise, illuminating the free state ahead of them, and allowed themselves to feel the full weight of what they had accomplished. When Nala's tears finally subsided, they continued across the bridge and into Pennsylvania. The landscape looked the same as it had on the Maryland side, the same trees, the same fields, the same morning mist rising from the ground. But everything felt different. The air felt different. The light felt different. She felt different. They walked into the town of Kennett Square as the sun fully rose, drawing curious stares from the people beginning their morning routines. A black man directed them to a building that served as a refuge for newly arrived freedom seekers, a place where they could rest, get proper clothes, and begin planning their new lives. The refuge was run by a free black woman named Margaret, who had herself escaped slavery 15 years earlier. She took one look at their exhausted faces and travel-worn bodies and immediately set about caring for them. Hot baths, clean clothes, a proper meal, and beds in a room that they could lock from the inside, something Nala had never experienced before. "You're safe now," Margaret told them. "Really, truly safe. No one can legally take you back to slavery while you're here." "Well," she amended, "the fugitive slave law means they can try, but we've got lawyers, we've got people who will fight for you. You're not alone anymore." Over the next few days, Margaret helped them understand what their new life could look like. Philadelphia had a thriving, free black community with churches, schools, mutual aid societies, and businesses owned by black people. There were jobs available. Kofi could work as a laborer or maybe apprentice to a carpenter, given his skill with wood. Nala could do domestic work, or maybe even learn a trade. The most important thing, Margaret emphasized, is to get papers, free papers that prove your status. Without them, any slave catcher can claim you're a runaway and try to take you back south. With papers, you've got legal protection. They obtained their free papers through an abolitionist lawyer who worked with the refuge. The documents felt precious, almost sacred, physical proof of their humanity, their right to exist as free people. Nala kept hers folded in a pocket she sewed into her dress, checking constantly to make sure it was still there. Within a week, they had moved to Philadelphia, settling in a boarding house in a neighborhood populated mostly by free black people and working-class white immigrants. It was crowded and noisy, nothing like the cabin they had shared on the plantation, but it was theirs by choice, and that made all the difference. Kofi found work at a shipyard, hard physical labor, but paid labor, money they earned and could keep. Nala took a position as a seamstress in a shop owned by a Quaker woman who paid fair wages and treated her employees with respect. It was strange at first, being able to walk away at the end of the day, to keep the money she earned, to make decisions about how to spend it. But adjusting to freedom was harder than Nala had expected. She found herself constantly afraid, jumping at sudden noises, unable to sleep without nightmares, feeling panic whenever she saw a white man who reminded her of Junior Thornwood or the overseers. The trauma of slavery did not simply disappear because she had crossed a state line. It lived in her body, in her reflexes, in the way she automatically lowered her eyes when speaking to white people, even though she no longer had to. Kofi struggled too. He had frequent headaches from the head injury he had sustained, and the scars on his body ached in cold weather. But worse than the physical pain was the psychological weight of survivors' guilt. They had made it to freedom, but what about all the people they had left behind? What about the children in the slave quarters, the women who had befriended Nala, the men who had worked beside Kofi in the fields? One night, about 3 months after their arrival in Philadelphia, Kofi came home from work looking troubled. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about going back." Back, Nala felt her heart stop. To Georgia, not to stay. But there are people doing it, going back south to help others escape, to be conductors on the Underground Railroad like Harriet. We know the plantation, we know the area. We could help people get out, and get ourselves captured and killed in the process, Nala said sharply. "No, Kofi, we risked everything to get here. I won't lose you by going back." "But don't you feel it?" Kofi asked intensely. "The guilt of being free while others suffer? The obligation to help?" "Of course I feel it," Nala admitted, "every day. But there are other ways to help, ways that don't require us to go back into the lion's den. We can work with the abolitionist societies here, raise money, help newly arrived freedom seekers adjust. We can tell our story, let people know what slavery really looks like." And that's what they began to do. They started speaking at abolitionist meetings, sharing their experiences with audiences of white Northerners who had never witnessed slavery firsthand. Nala spoke about the casual violence, the sexual exploitation of enslaved women, the way the system destroyed families and crushed spirits. Kofi spoke about the psychological toll of being treated as property, about the courage it took to resist, about the hope that kept people alive in seemingly hopeless circumstances. Their testimony was powerful because it was personal, specific, undeniable. Some listeners wept openly, others became angry, converted to the abolitionist cause by the reality of what Nala and Kofi described. A few challenged them, accused them of exaggerating, but their scars and the intensity of their conviction made such accusations ring hollow. Through this work, they found purpose in their freedom. They were not just survivors. They were witnesses, teachers, activists fighting to end the system that had nearly destroyed them. It gave meaning to their suffering, turned their trauma into a tool for change. A year after their arrival in Philadelphia, Nala discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a complicated mix of emotions. She was terrified. What if something went wrong? What if the baby had health problems from all the hardship she had endured? But she was also filled with a fierce joy. This child would be born free, would never know the weight of chains, would grow up in a world where they owned themselves. When their daughter was born on a crisp spring morning, Nala held her and wept. She named her Amara, which meant grace in one of the African languages spoken by her grandmother. Amara would grow up hearing stories of her parents' escape, would understand the price of the freedom she took for granted. But she would also grow up with opportunities Nala had never imagined. She would learn to read and write in a real school. She would choose her own path in life. She would love whom she wanted without fear that they would be sold away from her. As the years passed, Nala and Kofi built a life that was not perfect but was theirs. They saved money and eventually bought a small house. They remained active in the abolitionist movement, their home becoming a station on the Underground Railroad, helping newly arrived freedom seekers just as they had once been helped. They watched their daughter grow into a bright, confident young woman who took her freedom as her birthright, while understanding its fragility and its cost. But they also watched with growing alarm as the conflict over slavery intensified. Political tensions between North and South escalated. Violence broke out in Kansas over whether it would be a free or slave state. The Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision declared that black people, whether enslaved or free, could never be citizens. The country seemed to be hurtling toward some terrible reckoning. Then in 1861, when Amara was 12 years old, the war came. The southern states seceded. The first shots were fired at Fort Sumter, and suddenly the question of slavery's future was being decided not through politics and persuasion, but through blood and battle. Kofi wanted to enlist immediately, to fight for the freedom of those still enslaved, but Nala begged him not to. They had survived so much, built so much. She could not bear the thought of losing him to war. But when the Union finally began allowing black men to enlist in 1863, when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in rebel states to be free, Kofi could no longer stay away from the fight. "This is what we've been waiting for," he told Nala the night before he left to join the United States colored troops. "This is the moment when slavery finally ends. I have to be part of it." Nala understood, even though her heart was breaking. She watched him march away with his regiment, a free man fighting to free others, and prayed that he would survive to see the world they had risked everything to reach. A world where slavery was not just illegal in some states, but abolished everywhere, forever. The war years were difficult. Nala continued her work with the abolitionist movement, now focused on supporting black soldiers and raising money for newly freed people flooding into Philadelphia from the South. She worried constantly about Kofi, living for his letters, holding her breath every time she heard of a battle. Finally, in April 1865, the war ended. Lee surrendered. Slavery was abolished by constitutional amendment, and Kofi came home, scarred, older, changed by what he had witnessed and done, but alive. They held each other and cried, grieving for all who had not survived, celebrating the freedom that had finally come for everyone. In the years that followed, as the nation struggled through Reconstruction, as formerly enslaved people fought to claim their rights as citizens, Nala and Kofi continued their work. They helped establish schools for freed people, worked with charitable organizations providing aid to those transitioning from slavery to freedom, and never stopped telling their story. Now, decades after that desperate night when they had fled the Thornwood plantation, Nala sat in her own home, a home she owned, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, all of them born free. She was an old woman now, her body bearing the marks of a hard life, but her spirit remained unbroken. She thought about Junior Thornwood sometimes, wondering what had become of him after the war, after his world of privilege built on slavery had collapsed. She thought about the people they had left behind in the quarters, hoped that they had all survived to see freedom. She thought about Harriet Tubman, who had guided them to freedom and gone on to become a legend, a symbol of courage and resistance, but mostly she thought about the young woman she had been, terrified and trapped, seeing no way out, believing that survival meant submission. That young woman had found courage she didn't know she possessed, had chosen resistance over submission, had walked through hell to reach freedom, and in doing so she had not just saved herself and Kofi, she had contributed, in her small way, to the larger movement that had finally destroyed the institution of slavery. "Tell us the story again, Grandma," one of her grandchildren asked, as they often did. "Tell us about the night you and Grandpa ran away." Nala smiled and began to speak, her voice still strong despite her years. She told them about the cotton fields and the cruel master's son, about the decision to run and the journey through the swamp, about Harriet Tubman and the bridge into Pennsylvania. She told them so they would remember, so they would understand what had been sacrificed for their freedom, so they would never take for granted the rights and dignity that had been denied to so many for so long. And as she spoke, she felt at peace. The trauma of slavery would always be part of her, scars that would never fully heal. But she had survived. She had resisted. She had won her freedom and helped others do the same. She had lived to see slavery end, and to raise children and grandchildren who would never know its chains. That was enough. That was everything. That was the victory that made all the suffering, all the fear, all the desperate running through darkness worth it. She had lived to be free, and her descendants would carry that freedom forward into a future she could barely imagine, but had helped to make possible. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey through one of history's darkest chapters and brightest triumphs of the human spirit. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join our membership club for exclusive content about untold stories of resistance and survival. Share this video with others who need to hear these stories of courage and resilience. And please, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. These stories matter. These voices deserve to be heard. And by engaging with this content, you help ensure that the struggles and victories of people like Nala and Kofi are never forgotten. Until next time, remember, freedom is never free, and the fight for justice is never truly over. This completes the 5-block screenplay for Rich Master Strikes a Slave Before Her Husband. What happened that night was unthinkable. The narrative follows Nala and Kofi's complete journey from enslavement through their escape to freedom and their lives afterward, maintaining the dramatic tension and emotional depth throughout all 5 blocks.